how's it going? As she said, my name is Conrad Sun. I am a TV literary manager at Meridian Artists, we're a literary management company located in Los Angeles. Our head office is being in Canada. And then I'm also the founder of filmescape.com. Basically, it's if you haven't heard of it already, it's an online resource that basically acts like an encyclopedia for basically everything that you want to know about film and television, terminology, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, if you want to check that out too, that'd be great. But enough about me. Let's start talking about management. And so basically, I want to quickly go over the agenda for today's webinar, and then once I go over that, that's so you have sort of an overview in terms of what we're doing, and then we'll dive into it in more detail from there. So, so first off, I want to talk about, before we dive into anything, what exactly is a manager? This sort of, the role of managers has sort of evolved in the past few years, especially both in literary and in the talent departments. But I'm going to be focusing mainly on television and literary today. And I'll foray into a little bit about film, but mostly it'll be with television and literary. So we'll talk about the role of a manager, and then how that mixes in with the seasons of television. We'll talk about a manager versus an agent, and those two differences, and if you need both. And then talk about what managers do and don't do for their clients as well. So we'll touch on that a little bit, just so you get an idea of what a manager is, and you can sort of decide for yourself if this is someone that you need in your life here. So next we'll talk about, so once we define what really a manager does and what they are, we'll talk about how to get the attention of a manager. And so we'll talk about your sample. We'll address the idea of query letters, which is always a hot topic, screenwriting competitions, pitch fest, that kind of thing, and then how to choose the manager and what you're doing in terms of your brand when you're finding your manager there. So we'll talk about that stuff. We'll talk about the process of picking a manager and the factors that play into it. So as you can see here, we'll talk about dating and how that is compared to finding a manager. We'll talk about the difference between access and hunger, and just the relationship that you should be having or should be seeking with your manager. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive right in here. So what exactly is a manager? So as we go through this webinar, obviously I am one of many managers, and when I'm referencing management and how that works, it's mainly how it's going to be my approach and how I approach management. Obviously, certain managers might do something different, but this is how I approach, and this is how Meridian Artists approach management. And I'm hoping that it'll shed light to just what it means to have good representation. So when we do literary management, it goes beyond just managing you as a TV writer, managing you as an artist. We look at ourselves also as life managers as well, because the decisions you make in terms of the shows you want to write on, the shows you're trying to sell, the timing of it all obviously plays into your life. And so we want to make sure that those decisions are made in consortium with your life goals as well. A lot of times when we sign our clients and we work with them, the first questions we ask is, what do you want your life to be? How do you envision your life to be in the next 5 years in terms of lifestyle? Our goals and the way we manage writers changes depending on the type of lifestyle you want to live, if you want to have a family or not have a family, where you want to live. Those kind of factors play into how we plan every writer's career moving forward. So we take a very life approach, and we want to offer as much life management as we do career management with our clients. And so with that, one of the things that we focus on with every single client are what I like to call the 3 pillars, right? Every client has 3 pillars that they're trying to balance, and that is money, career, and art. Now, obviously, the goal is to be able to have a life where you're satisfying all three at the same time. That's the ultimate goal, right? Your ultimate goal is to be able to get to, you know, Shonda Rhimes status where you can do what you love, where you can make great art, but you can also make great money while you're doing it. But as we all know, the reality of it all is that most of the time you're not able to address all three at the same time. If we try and strive for it, and obviously if you're lucky to do so, that's amazing, but we all know that sometimes you have to address certain things over others. For example, if you came to us and said, you know, I just need money, I need to pay the bills, I need to look after my health care, whatever that is, our approach to finding you staffing opportunities and selling shows would be much different than, let's say, if you were, if you had 2 years worth of savings and you wanted to work on your, you know, feature screenplay that's going to take you 7 months to write, then that would be fine. Or if you were looking to take a pay cut in order to work with a certain individual to help boost your career, those are all conversations that we have based on your need or based on one of your pillars of money, career, and art. And so these are the conversations that we have with our clients, and I think every manager should have with their client as well, because it goes beyond just making money, it goes beyond just making career decisions. It's all three at the same time that we try and manage within our clients. And so that's one role of managers, to focus on those things, those life aspects within our clients. And secondly, one thing that definitely sets a manager apart from most roles in the entertainment industry is development. Managers take the time to develop material with their clients, give them script notes, generate ideas with them, and help them develop their scripts and their samples to get them to where they need to be, help them develop pilots so that they can sell them, develop show ideas, develop pitches, all of which is to service the client's need to either sell or get staffed. And we'll talk more about samples as we progress through this webinar here. And then another role of an agent that's sort of evolved, I'd say, within the past, I don't know, 8 or 10 years here, is corresponding with the agent. I know this sounds a little silly, but at the end of the day, agents are extremely busy on their end doing what they do as agents. And a lot of times, for better or for worse, it's hard for clients to really correspond or keep track with that with what the agents are doing. And a lot of the roles of the managers are to correspond with the agent and, quite frankly, sometimes even keep them in line. You know, I know my job as a manager, I spend a lot of time talking with agents who I co-rep writers with, just to make sure we're all on the same page, just to make sure we game plan. But at the end of the day, it's me talking to the agent as opposed to the client, not because the client and the agent relationship isn't good, it's just that the agent literally is extremely busy doing what they do. And so we spend most of the time corresponding with the agent. And then once we have our ducks in line, then we'll involve the client as well when talking with the with agent, either myself or the agent. And of course, another role of the manager is to correspond with the industry, right? To know the executives, the producers, the auspices of the business, so that we can introduce and connect the writer with the industry, with the people in the industry, and go from there. So that's obviously our job as well, that we work in consortium with agents as well if we co-rep clients with them. So that's sort of the general role of the manager. You know, it's development and life management is the way I like to sort of put it in a nutshell there. So one of the biggest questions people ask is, what's the difference between a manager versus agent? And so there's a few, in my opinion. I mean, at the end of the day, the agent is there to, I'm sorry, at the end of the day, the agent and the manager are working as a team if they co-rep the client. The agent is focused on the information and the access to information. So they're the hub of all the information within the industry. So in other words, if there's any open writing assignments, if there's staffing opportunities, agents are the ones that are the best at collecting that information. And when it comes to outgoing phone calls and submissions of material, agents are best at that. And also when it comes to finding and generating the best deal for the client, that's what agents do as well. So now I'm sure you're wondering, well, what the heck does a manager do and all that? The manager is there to manage all those processes, right? So it's not it's not enough anymore just to submit you everywhere. It's not enough anymore just to submit to every single staffing opportunity. It's just not as fruitful as it used to be. Managers need to manage this whole process and work with the agent in order to do that. And so obviously the agencies have way more access and way more firepower in terms of outgoing phone calls and clients, but at the end of the day, managers need to still manage all of that for the client. And work with the client to correspond with the agents. A perfect example is, if a writing opportunity comes up for one of my clients, I'll get on the phone with an agent, with their agent, and we will then talk about, the pros and cons, what ways to best, how to best generate the best deal, and then me and the agent will get on the phone with the client, and we'll discuss it over with the client. And then the agent will go off and make his phone calls, and then I'll stay on the phone with the client for another half an hour just to discuss what was just been said. So that's a way to depict how an interaction between agents and managers might work within the client. And one thing to keep in mind as well, and not to downplay agencies, but the truth is agencies have a much higher agency agenda, especially the bigger agencies, have an agency agenda versus a client agenda. And again, it's not that they don't think their clients are important, it's just there is a certain agenda within the agency that they're trying to service, whereas managers, because they're not as big as the companies, as the agencies are, their agenda is way more client-driven than company-driven. And so that's sort of the approach. And one example is packaging. So this is a classic example of how there is an agency agenda over a client agenda. And so the way packaging works in television, in case you don't already know, is that if an agency puts together a television show with their clients, either the creator or a lead actor or whatever that might be, they call it a TV package. And what happens is they then sell that TV package. Once the show is created or greenlit by a network, that show becomes a package for that agency. And what the agency does is they collect what's called a packaging fee from the studio. The studio will pay the agency a fee for every episode and for purchasing that show, and the agency will collect a packaging fee for the show as the show continues to air. Now, when that happens, if an agency has a package, any client that is on that show or any client that is working on that show, the agency does not collect commission from that client. So a lot of the times, an agency will have a show that is their package, but the incentive to sign their clients onto that show have now diminished because they can't collect commissions for their clients. So in other words, sometimes an agency agenda will trump or will trump the client agenda, because yes, of course, it'd be best for the client to be on that show, but they'll probably look to push the client onto another show in order for them to collect commission, as opposed to putting on a show where they can't. Then that doesn't happen all the time. They're not as evil as you think, but again, there's a certain agenda there that they try and push. Whereas for us, we try and find what's best for a client at all times, and there's less of a company agenda there. So that's something to keep in mind as well in terms of agents and managers. So oftentimes people ask, who should you seek first then, an agent or a manager? And when it comes to emerging writers that are looking to break into the industry, I hands-on believe that you should be seeking a manager first, mainly because they'll give you more time of the day. But more importantly is, when you're an emerging writer, a big emphasis is placed on developing your material, developing your samples, and a manager is going to do a much better job of that than an actual agent will. And again, we'll touch more on samples in a little minute here. But so I would strongly suggest, if you were trying to pick who to seek first, managers are oftentimes easier to find, but in my opinion, if they do their job correctly, they're more effective at doing their job and helping emerging writers. And then another question people often ask is, do you need both? And my typical answer to that is eventually. So a lot of the times when you're an emerging writer and you're signed with a manager, and then you're looking for an agent. And we have lots of clients who come to who want to sign with agents and talk to us about it on a regular basis. And it's all about a timing thing for us. We always need to wait for the best time to include the agent for several reasons. For one, there's the extra commission. So if you do bring on an agent, you will lose another 10%. There's that factor. But oftentimes writers say, well, I just want to work. It doesn't matter. Money at this point doesn't matter. I just want to find that job and whatever creates the best chance for that. And I agree that if an extra 10% gets you that job, I'm sure that's a small price to pay. But that being said, your access and your appeal to agents change as your staffing opportunities and as your jobs evolve. So, for example, we have clients that, again, wanted to sign with agents at first, but we worked with them and got them staffed right off the bat. And from there, they managed to hold off giving that extra 10%, but they also managed to hold off and making 2 quick decisions on who should rep them. Because here's the thing: before you get staff, your access to the right agents are very limited, because at the end of the day, agents, it's much harder for agents to work with emerging writers with no credits. But once you get staff, your access to agents and the amount of agents that will be appealing to you changes after that. So we oftentimes tell our clients just to be patient and see what staffing opportunities come. If no staffing opportunities come, or no jobs are on the way after a certain amount of time, then we can explore finding that agent. But just knowing that the access to agents, or the pool of agents to choose from, is much smaller if you don't have credits or you have very little credits. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about managers versus agents. It's all about timing, and it's all about figuring out what's best for you, both from a money standpoint and a career standpoint, for finding that agent. So more so on the management side now. Oftentimes, I like to talk about this because I think it's important for clients and writers to know what managers actually do for them, when they're not on the phone talking with them or when they're not emailing them. And so on that note, I think the biggest thing with the management and the client relationship is trust. Trusting that the manager is always looking out and always doing the best thing for that client, and knowing that that's going to be happening all the time. And so if there's that trust, then that's first and foremost, the most important thing. Without that trust, the management and client relationship will not work. And so yeah, I always tell clients just to have trust and have respect with their managers, and know that they're doing everything possible for that client. So with that in mind, there's obviously the topic of correspondence, right? Every client is different. Every client, especially new clients, ask me all the time, so how often can I call you? Or so is what's better, email or text or phone? And for me, I always tell them whatever works best for you. Just know that that's what we're supposed to be here for, is for you to bounce ideas off of, to talk to work things out. The only thing I ask of the client is to make sure that the manager is aware, right? To make sure the manager is aware of how much correspondence you would like, and we're happy to accommodate that. There's nothing I hate more than a client that calls me or emails me and says, you don't talk to me enough. Well, make sure you make it clear how much talking you would like, and then I'm happy to accommodate that. Same thing, when you're looking for your manager, or when you're with your manager, knowing the correspondence in the email, what you would like. Most managers should be able to accommodate that, and every client is different. Some clients actually don't like to talk a lot. Sometimes clients like to talk once a week, and I'm happy to accommodate both. So managers, it's all about the right type of communication with that client. Certain clients prefer text messages, emails, phones, whatever that be. Just make sure it's clear with your manager, and the manager should be able to accommodate. Managers also are there to set up meetings and submissions. I think that's pretty straightforward. You take your sample, and their job is to introduce you to the town, explore opportunities, and meet the right people that suit your career needs. One thing, though, that you should expect, or sorry, you should not expect from your managers or for your agents for that matter, are CCs and submission updates. And it's not that we don't want the client to know where we're sending them or what we're doing, is that there's the time it takes for follow-up and the time it takes to generate updates and the time it takes to keep the client informed of all that information is time consuming, and the time can be spent better spent doing other things that can benefit the client. And that goes back to what I was saying about the trust issue, just the trust element of the relationship is making sure that the client trusts that the manager is submitting them to the places that they would like to be submitted. And so we tell our clients that, you know, we won't CC you, we won't give you updates, because that also creates another thing to worry about for the client as well, when in my mind they should be worrying about you know, their craft as writers. So yes, clients should not expect submission updates, submission CCs from their managers, because it just opens up a whole different can of worms when it comes to management of the client. I also talked about agency correspondence earlier. You know, that's our big job, is to correspond with the agent on behalf of the client. And just to clarify, it's not that we're trying to keep any information from the client, or it's not that we're trying to hide information from the client or keep secrets. Is there's certain pieces of information that we just need to process on behalf of the client before presenting to the client. And so agents and managers will do that first and present it to the client in the best way, because it can often be confusing or overwhelming or incorrect, and it's our job to make sure all that stuff is in line before we talk to the client, because at the end of the day, the client's job is, you know, we want them to work on the craft as opposed to worrying about other pieces of information that their representatives can be doing for them in the first place. And so, yeah, that basically covers, you know, what the managers do and therefore don't do for their clients. And so let's dive into the whole I shouldn't say mystery, the whole what most people are interested in is the best way to get the attention of a manager. And so with that, my philosophy is all boils down to the most important thing when working as a TV writer is the sample. And every TV writer should have that one sample. I call it the Hotel California, or Stairway to Heaven, whatever you want to call it. But that one huge hit that the writer has that they go out with, that is used to be their representation of their writing, and is that their strongest sample. But that it all starts with the sample first, not your credits, not your background, not the contest you've won, but the actual sample itself and how great it is. Because at the end of the day, as I've stated here, you get one chance to make it count, and how you make it count is through how you present yourself on the page. And so we work with our clients just to get that sample to 8, 9, 10 out of 10. And that's what we strive for, because the sample will do all the work. With our clients, we've built clients with literally zero resume, but let the sample do all the work. And once that sample goes out there, and if it's good, if it's great, the sample will travel, and the sample will get to places, and the sample will move. And one of the biggest litmus tests that I have when I set up a sample to test whether or not it's great is if I get a call from someone who I didn't submit the sample to. And that happens to me a lot, but that's also a good sign that the sample is doing its job. If the sample wasn't great, that would never happen. And so, again, sample, sample, sample. Make sure your pilot script is great. And one thing I actually didn't mention in here in this list is people often ask, you know, speccing episodes versus original pilots. I think as a writer, I think speccing episodes, meaning writing episodes of television that already exist, I think is a good exercise and is a good way to have something in your arsenal. And in my opinion, when it comes to staffing, I think showrunners should be reading specs instead of originals anyways, but at the end of the day, that's not true. People in the industry, in this environment currently, they love to read and they want to read original samples. They want to see an original voice. and they want to see original stories and characters. So with that in mind, you should have a spec in your arsenal, but your main your primary web example should be an original pilot. And with that original pilot, you should always take the time to make sure that it is your best idea. And by that I mean take the time to really explore all the different ideas that are out there that you are excited to write about. Write them all down and make sure that you're not picking an idea because it's the only idea that you have. I shouldn't say the only idea, it's the best idea that you have. Make sure that you are certain that this is the one you're going to write because at the end of the day, aside from being a great writer, the idea of the pilot also carries a lot of weight. You know, if you wrote a sample about a high school teacher that becomes a drug dealer, it could be the greatest sample ever, but if it's something that's not fresh or original, it won't travel as far. But if you have a great idea along coupled with good writing, it'll travel and it'll do a job as a sample. So really take the time to explore every idea and talk amongst your friends and your peers to see which of your ideas sound great, and then write a great sample from there. I talked about the litmus test for sample strength. Again, the idea is if you send your script to friends, that's great, but the idea is if you can send it to someone who's not your friend, and that particular someone sends it to someone else without you telling them to do that, that's often a good test of a good sample. And if it doesn't happen, then oftentimes it's because your sample isn't great. So again, a great sample will travel on its own. I've seen it way too many times for it not to be true. And so I have also written here writers groups. Writers groups are great as well because it helps you build that sample and works with people that offer opinions. The only thing I would caution with writers group is make sure when you're submitting your script to friends, when you're submitting your script to the people in the group, all you're interested in is what is wrong with the script, what is flawed with the script. Friends are often great in telling you how great scripts are and how certain things work, which is obviously to your benefit, but at the end of the day, you want to know why your script doesn't work, and use your writers groups to do that. And a second thing if you are in a writers group, one thing that really helps with the writers group is oftentimes you'll send the script out and then everyone will read it, and then you get back together and you talk about the script and you give in front of the writer, and then you deliver the notes accordingly. What I would suggest with writers groups is you send a script out to everyone in the group, then the group should get together without the writer in the group so that the group can discuss and debate and figure out what the notes are. I oftentimes tell the group to figure out what the 3 headlines of the notes are, and then deliver it to the writer at a separate time, rather than have the writer sit there and sit through the debate, sit through the discussion of those notes, because it can be pretty overwhelming. So again, I encourage writers groups to do this, but to make sure when they compile notes for the writer, do it together first without the writer there, and then present it to the writer in a very organized fashion, and it's way more effective that way. So yeah, writers groups are great for that. And then one thing I always emphasize with the sample that writers should always think about is the psychology of the reader. Now, what do I mean by this? So let me back up a little bit. I tell writers to read lots of scripts, and automatically they think it's because so that they can see what good writing looks like, so they can see what bad writing looks like, and they're partly correct in thinking that. You know, it's if you can get your hands on some great scripts and see what a great script looks like, and vice versa, see what bad scripts looks like. You know, oftentimes that will be beneficial for the writer. But what I think is more important when it comes to reading lots of scripts is you start to understand and appreciate the psychology of an executive, or the psychology, in this case, of a manager, as they're reading pilots. Because at the end of the day, here's how it is. Let's say you're sending a script out to executives, or maybe even managers in this case. Those executives, they read scripts every day. They read lots of scripts every day. oftentimes when they're reading new samples, they will do it when they get home. And just imagine this. Imagine an executive getting home on a Wednesday night, having dinner with their family, putting their kids to bed, spending time with their partner, and then once the partner goes to bed, they take a glass of wine and a pile of scripts, and they sit in their chair and they get ready to read. And your script is probably number 3 or 4 on that pile. And so that's where you have to think about when someone's reading your script. So you are that script in that pile. And with that in mind, you oftentimes, and I don't like this, but it's just the way it is, you oftentimes don't have the luxury of them sitting through or reading through 60 pages. You have to basically grab their attention within the first 10, maybe even less. And so along with being a good prose writer, having a great voice, you also have to show that you deliver a story and capture the attention of the reader at an early point. And so going back to my idea of having writers read a lot of scripts is, as you read a lot of scripts, you start to understand and empathize, in this case, what executives go through when they're reading lots and lots and lots of scripts, right? And when I give writers notes on how to structure their script and how to tell their story, it's often because I know how executives think, and I can think like an executive. Aside from I used to work as one, but I read the same volume as they do, and there's a certain psychology to reading a volume of scripts as opposed to just reading one. And so that plays a big part in writing your sample. And so aside from having great prose and a great voice, what I often tell people to imagine when they're writing, or to consider when they're writing, is when an executive picks up their sample, the first question in their mind, always, that they want to have answered as quick as possible is, what is this pilot about? And where are we going in the series? Those are the first 2 questions in their mind, and their goal is to get that question answered as quickly as possible. That's what they really care about. Obviously, they want to know about the characters, they want to know about the world and the rules, but at the end of the day, they just want to know, what the heck is this pilot about? Where are we going with this series? And the sooner you can answer those questions, the easier they will be on the ride with you through your script. Because if you're not the top tier senior level writer, they oftentimes won't even give you the chance to read through the 60 pages. They want to know right away. They want to know as soon as possible. So when you're writing, even though it might go against the way that the craft of screenwriting has been taught to you, or that you've appreciated it, the psychology of the reader is that they want to know where they're going with the pilot, what the story of the pilot is, and where they're going on with the series. So the sooner you can have those questions answered, the better chance you have of the executive reading your entire script and getting to know you as a writer. Because once they have those questions answered, you can reveal character all you want, you can talk about the world all you want, you can reveal secondary characters, introduce B-plots, you can do all of that. If they have those questions answered already, it's much easier to read from them than if they don't and they have to wait until page 40 in order to find out what this pilot is really about, or page 40 to find out what the series is about. Excuse me. So with that in mind, I put a bullet point here, Blind Spot, which is a pilot that one of our clients sold to NBC a couple years ago, and it's currently on the air. And the reason why I use this as an example is because what every executive said when they read this pilot was that they knew they could see what the series was within page 8. And from there, they just had to finish the pilot. And that's part of again, going through the psychology of the reader. Now, I'm not just saying that it has to have this massive cliffhanger or this big twist or anything like that. It obviously helps, but you need to present it so that by page 8, 9, or 10, the reader knows what the series is about and what the pilot is about. And so with Blind Spot, Martin Garrow, who wrote it, presented the Jane Doe in the middle of Times Square with the tattoos, then presented Sullivan Stapleton character Kurt Weller, and then he used the twist of having his name on her back at the end of page 8. And by that time, every person who read the pilot knows where they're going with the series and where everything's going. And so I encourage you, when you write your pilot, is to know where your series is going, but also know what the story of your pilot is, and try and establish that as early as possible within your teaser. And write that in your teaser without letting the rest of the pilot hinder you from doing that. In other words, don't think about what the B plot is, don't let the beats of Act 4, don't let the twist at the end of the pilot hinder you from just writing a great teaser. Just write the teaser first so that we know where the series is going, we know what the pilot's about, and then use that as your starting point to build the rest of your pilot, and I think you'll have a lot more success in writing a great pilot. And so I'll talk with Stage32 to figure out the best way to get the pilot out to you guys, but I'll send the pilot of Blind Spot to you guys so you can tell you know, how effectively it was presented, so that by page 8 you knew where the pilot was going, you knew what the series was going, and therefore the pilot got a lot of attention. So that's something to keep in mind. And again, I'll talk with Stage32 and work with them on figuring out the best way to get that pilot to you would be. So there's my rant on samples. So the next rant that I'm going to go on, or the next part of the lecture that I'm going to go through, is the role of a television writer. And this plays into how to get the attention of a manager, because it's how to get the attention of a manager is also how to be a successful television writer. And so if you see here, what I tell screenwriters all the time is that there's a big difference in writing for television versus being a television writer. And the difference is with the way the television writing landscape works, is that being a television writer, 50% of your job, I'd say, is the actual writing part, writing, you know, opening up your computer and writing a great script and developing great ideas and developing pitches. I'd say that's half your job in the television writing world. It's a little different in the feature writing world, but in the television writing world, the other half of your job is the networking part, the social part, the knowing how to speak in a room part, the knowing how to pitch your ideas in a room part, because that is how television writing works. You all know that there are writers' rooms, but to get to those writers' rooms, it's all about, we can get the samples out there, you could be really great with that, but you are going to be interviewed by the showrunner, you are going to be recommended by other people, and so part of that game is the networking and, lack of a better word, schmoozing part of it, and the hustle part of it. You know, oftentimes our writers will expect us to send them out on meetings and submissions, which we will do, but it's also your part as well to make use of your connections, because it's a much better referral coming from a fellow writer than it is coming from the manager of a writer that's trying to get a job. And so we often tell our clients, half of your job as a television writer is to work on your own hustle and to get to know as many people as possible, because you're going to be counting on those people for referrals and for ideas in the industry. And so, so how does this pertain to getting a manager? Is a manager wants, you know, obviously you have to have a great sample. That's the no-brainer. That's the first part. But a manager wants to know that you have a certain level of hustle in you as well, and you have to give them a reason to further manage you from what you've already done. And so if you notice here, I've noticed the bottom, I've written the bottom of my slide here, it says representation equals step 3. And so what I mean by that is, step 1 is obviously to get your sample to where it needs to be, right? It needs to be a great, great, great sample. Step 2 is getting an attention of anybody of importance. So in other words, a producer or a studio executive or a network executive or anything like that. Figure out how to get the attention of that person And again, I'll talk more about how some effective way to doing that. But that's the second step, is get the attention of that person first before you go to finding a manager. Because at the end of the day, I know it's a very cynical world out there, and I know that it's oftentimes how it works when managers are looking for clients, but they want a reason other than just I have a great script. They want a reason to give you guidance and to manage you that way. So the actual seeking part of the seeking representation part of it, in my opinion, is step 3 of it all. The hustle part is step 2 after you've written your pilot. And again, I'll talk more about that in a bit. But just note that before you jump to managers, is it's not always a case where you write a great script and then you find a manager from there. You have to do a little bit more hustle before the manager, to find a manager that will want to step in. So with that in mind, one of the biggest questions that people ask about is the all-important query letter. And so, because people aren't really sure how effective it is at times. And so, as a manager who does get query letters, I often question the same thing. So one of the things people often ask is it a waste of time? And the short answer is no, but there's a certain way and there's a certain tact to presenting a query letter in order to make it not waste your time. Because, I already made a mistake. So if I've written here second step, but as just to clarify, it's actually, as I mentioned in the previous slide, it's the third, reaching out to the manager is the third step in it all, and the query letter could be a way to do it. But in that query letter, you have to give them that reason to reply, and that reason to reply has to come from your hustle. So I hope I didn't confuse you there. I really meant to say query letter is the third step in terms of reaching out to your manager, and the query letter could be the form in which you reach out to that manager. But within that query letter, give them that reason to reply. Show them what you've done with your hustle so that we can complement that hustle and help guide that hustle in order to manage you from there. If it's just I have a script, or if it's just I have a great idea, oftentimes it's not enough to really get the attention of a manager. And then also show that you have realistic expectations. And the reason why I bring that up is because I literally today, just before this webinar, I received a query letter, and this is what it read. It says, "Hello, Conrad. I've written a sequel feature film screenplay about Wonder Woman. I need to present it to Warner Brothers Studios. I do not have a manager or an agent. I'm looking for a one-off representation, longer at your kindness, so as to field this material to Warner Brothers. Would you take this lucrative task? Thank you so much and kind regards. Sincerely, Jane Doe." Obviously, that's not her name, but this was literally a query letter I received this morning. And so this, for one, shows that they don't really get a sense of realistic expectations, but also it doesn't give the reader and the manager any reason to want to have to manage them other than I have a screenplay. And so this would be an example of how not to write a query letter. Because when I read this, not only does it show me that they have unrealistic expectations, that they're going to get a screenplay bought by Warner Brothers Studios about Wonder Woman. On top of that, I don't see anything here other than I have a script. And so I want to know that you have realistic expectations and that you have a certain level of hustle and you have a reason now for managers to step in. So with that, this is how I would suggest you should write a query letter. And keep in mind from the previous slide, brevity is, in my opinion, is key because managers are busy, agents are busy, and they get flooded with hundreds of emails a day, and they don't want to, nor do they need to be spending time reading an email from a stranger. So brevity is very key in this sense. So what I would say is, hello, so-and-so, whatever the manager's name is, and just as a simple social etiquette, just tell them how did you find them. You know, tell them where this all came from. I found your contact through, maybe it was through a website, maybe it was through IMDb, maybe it's through a friend, whatever it is, just as a norm in social etiquette, just tell them how you found their information. If someone contacted you, a complete stranger, the first question you would be asking is, how'd you find me? And just as social etiquette, you should present the same thing. So say, I found your contact information through, and then be friendly. Pleasure meeting you over email. Now, then the next part is you're presenting them the reason. In other words, show them what hustle you've done so far. So I'm an emerging screenwriter who recently, and then fill in the blank. It could be got the attention of so-and-so producer. It could be I won the screenplay competition. It could be you know, I have an offer to option my script. Whatever that might be, give them the reason to say, okay, I should step in and help this person beyond just I have a great script. And again, keep it brief. They don't need to know the life story. They don't need to know the full bio. They just need to know where you're at and where you could use some guidance in. And then the next sentence I would say is, through all of this, I'm looking for some guidance and ultimately would love to find representation, right, as I, and then you can fill in the blank. You can say, as I, you know, would like to staff on the show, or as if I would like to figure out how to navigate this offer I've been given. Whatever that piece of hustle that you've accomplished, show that you need some guidance and you would love some representation through it. And then from there, just again, as etiquette, just say, if you're interested, I've attached the script along with the logline, and include the logline below, because that's the first question that the manager will probably ask, is what is this script about? And of course, the more compelling the logline, the better. And notice here, what I didn't include in here is anything to talk about the bio or anything about your life. Again, I hate to sound cynical, but it's when it comes to reading a letter from a stranger, if they want to know more about you, they will contact you and they will ask more. But if you want to not overwhelm the reader, you don't need to let them know, this is my background, this is where I'm from. You know, I got you know, quarterfinalists at these competitions. Those people are all over the place. Just give them that main reason to want to represent you, and then from there, I would, if they want to know more about your background and who you are, they will definitely let you know. And so this is how I would approach writing a career letter in this sense. And obviously thank them for their time, and then go from there. So that's sort of the tact I would have when writing that career letter. So just to recap, I don't think they're a waste of time so long as you give the manager a reason to reply. Show that you have realistic expectations, and when I say here idea trumps all, this goes back to the make sure you pick a great idea and have a log line to represent that idea. Brevity is key, and again, personal info, credits, sales, that kind of thing. Give them just that one reason, and if they want to know more, they can. If you do have any TV credits, do include that as well. But again, keep it brief. Say I've staffed on this show, or I've worked on this show. Those help, but keep it brief. But in terms of bio, I would often tell writers just to hold off on that a little bit. Okay, moving on. Another question that I get is screenwriting competitions, and whether or not that is worth the while. And so let's talk about this for a minute here. In terms of time, I mean, at the end of the day, you're just submitting, right? And it doesn't hurt. The only downfall is that a lot of these competitions cost money. So if you're trying to manage your budget in sending your scripts out to these competitions, here's what I would advise. So there's screenwriting competitions all over the place, and they'll make their claims as to why their screenwriting competition is great. They'll make their claims as to success stories here and there. They'll all do that. And at the end of the day, I still try and find that one unicorn of a screenplay competition where an amazing movie was made from that competition. Still looking for that. Haven't found it yet, but I'm sure that will happen one day. But in the meantime, the best competitions, in my opinion, are the ones that are built around film festivals. And here's why I suggest that is with film festivals, especially the big ones like Sundance, Toronto, um, uh, oh my, I'm drawing a blank now. Austin, South by Southwest, Slam Dance even, Venice, Cannes, all those big film festivals. One thing that they all have in common is that that's where all the decision makers go to, right? Producers, executives, managers, agents, they all go to these big film festivals. And if you have a screenplay competition built around that festival, the winners, guess who they're going to get exposed to? Is all the people that are at the festival because it's branded with the festival. So, for example, if the Austin Film Festival is coming up in a few weeks here in October, and if you look at the lineup of panelists, if you look at the lineup of producers and managers, directors and agents, there are a ton of them out there. All of them love to go to the Austin Film Festival. The Austin Film Festival also has an Austin Film Festival screenwriting competition. When the announcers get announced, guess who are the people to first hear about them? The people that are at the festival, the directors, the producers, the executives, they're all there, and they will get exposure to the people who won that competition. So therefore, you already have a leg up there. And then if you're the winner there, those people will want to get to know the winners. And so that's, if you want to be selective in terms of what screenplay competition you want to submit to, go to the ones that are associated with big film festivals for that very reason. If you can also find out, a lot of film festivals don't show this, but some do. If you can find out who the judges are and who will be reading, that's also a big way to judge or to analyze whether or not it's good to submit to the festival. To the competition. One of my favorite stories is that Vince Gilligan, before he was Vince Gilligan and before he even got staffed on X-Files, he submitted a script to a screenwriting competition where Mark Johnson, who is a big film producer, read and liked. And from there, he made a great relationship with Mark Johnson, who ended up producing Breaking Bad for him. But point being is that if you have an idea and if it's shown that really significant judges and producers for this competition, those are also big green lights, big signs that you should probably submit to that competition as well. One thing to beware with some competitions is that you'll submit and they will send you an email and tell you that you've made the quarterfinals or that you made it to the next round or whatever. Just be aware of those type of competitions. I'm not going to name specific ones, but be aware that go to the competitions where they announce the winners or the quarterfinalists or the next rounders, whatever you want to call it, they announce it on the website and that you don't receive it as an email, because that's oftentimes a scam to get you excited about continuing to submit to their competition. So just go to the competitions where they announce the quarterfinalists, the semifinalists, and the finalists on the actual website, as opposed to sending an email telling you that you made the quarterfinals. That's just a quick little note to be aware of when you're looking at these competitions. Another question people ask is about the blacklist. We all know what the blacklist is. It started off as this collection of unproduced screenplays that gets announced at the end of November every year or at the beginning of December, and they're all feature films, and the industry goes crazy over them because they're unproduced feature films that are out there in the market and coming from the best writers out there. Since then, from I think was it 3 years ago, the Blacklist then formed a company that basically used the brand of the Blacklist to create a company where they could accept scripts, analyze scripts, and be the hub for unproduced, unsolicited scripts. That being said, it's not to say that success hasn't come from the Blacklist and their website and their company, but just know that you are now competing in a very, very, very diluted pool of scripts, and it's just a bigger pool to compete in and to rise to the top. And since then, the blacklist still exists, and I think it's very cool if you do get on it. I do feel personally that the brand has been tainted a little bit just because of that new company that they've started. But again, if money isn't an issue for you, it never hurts to get it on there, and it's a way to see, if it tracks. And here's the thing: if your script is good, it'll track. Like, that's just a general rule in the industry. If your script isn't good and it's not tracking, if your script isn't tracking and isn't getting attention and isn't getting passed on, it's probably not that good. So blacklist could be a way for you can test that, but just know that you are in a very diluted pool of other scripts. And I've included some examples here at the bottom of some of the good script competitions that I was talking about. Sundance Labs is amazing. Obviously, it's in consortium with the Sundance Film Festival, but there's been a lot of success from there. Slamdance is also great. Again, it's part of the Sundance community. I mentioned Austin. Austin's probably one of the better ones because, for whatever reason, a lot of panelists go out there, a lot of executives are out there, and the winners are very, very well publicized at that competition, and then get exposed to decision makers in the industry. So that's a good one. Track and B is another good competition you can look into, and obviously I'm sure you heard of the Page competition. It's a pretty decent competition as well. So you can look into those, and again, if money isn't an issue, it never hurts to submit your script to them and see what happens. So yeah, there's the thing about screenwriting competitions. So from there, let's say you got the attention of, let's say you're about to get, let me back up a second. Let's just say you're trying to find out which managers to reach out to. Obviously, you want to try and reach out to all of them, but there's a lot of them, and sometimes a lot of them might not be the right ones for you to reach out to, and might be a waste of your time. So how do you navigate this? So the first thing to consider in the business here is there are a lot of managers that work on their own, or they work as pairs, or they work even at a very, very small company where there's 3 or 4. So there's individuals, there's small little boutiques of 3 or 4 managers, maybe less than 5, and then there's big firms, like the 3 Arts, the Brillsteins, the Management 360s, the Untitled's, the Circle of Confusion. All these are what I call big companies with managers, and oftentimes it's uncertain as to which one of these to hit up, which one of these to go after. And so, first of all, know that they all exist, know that they're there. And I think for emerging writers, I think one of the obvious choices to go to is for the either individual or to the little boutique ones, for a couple reasons. One is the big firms, the big companies, they're big for a reason. They're established. They have their established set of writers, and it's very easy for you to get lost in the mix. And quite frankly, they might not have the bandwidth to work with emerging writers. I'm not saying that they don't, but their chances are that with the size of their firm, that they might not have the bandwidth to work with those emerging writers. Individuals are always looking to build their company and to build their roster, and so if they might be more willing to work with emerging writers. Same thing with boutique people. But one thing that you can do to help find that is find out which television series best suits your brand of writing. Not necessarily, the one you want to staff on the most, but just the type of series that best represents the type of writer you are. And then use resources like Studio System, Variety Insight, IMDb Pro, if you can get access to those. Obviously, they cost money, so it's up to you to decide if you want to invest in them. But use those resources to find those series with that cater to your brand. Find out who those writers are on those series, and then see which one of those writers have managers, and then go look at those managers. Take a look at their roster, take a look at their company, and see which ones feel like the best fit for you. So things to look for is the size of the roster, and again, these resources, these databases are never accurate, but you can get a sense of the type of people they're representing. If you find that you're a drama writer and this person only represents comedy people, it might not be the best manager to go after. So these are the sort of things you kind of have to think about when you sort of reverse engineer which managers to go after. But when you do, you know, you can either do it through query letter and do it using the method I told you, but most importantly, try and find a way to give the manager that reason to reply, and then good things might come from that. And obviously, I put in here network as well. You know, being a television writer, networking is the biggest part of it, in my opinion, is trying to get to know the right people and letting the sample do its work after you've met the people. So when finding the right manager, those are things to consider and to think about. And then once you've sort of developed that list of people to go out to, go at them with tact and go at them and approach them, again, giving them a reason to reply. So one of the things that I want to talk about when you are reaching out and talking to potential managers is to focus your brand. Your brand as a writer. Now, this doesn't mean pick your genre. This doesn't mean pick your type of comedy you want to write or type of drama that you write. It can be, but that's not necessarily what it means. What it means is tell me what it is you write best and what it is that you're most passionate about writing. It could be female-driven comedy. It could be ensemble, dark, gritty dramas, whatever that might be. Know what your brand is of writing. And oftentimes people will argue, well, that will just pigeonhole you and will diminish your opportunities. And to that I say the opposite. I think it's way more important, way more sellable to have a brand that represents who you are as a writer. What I hear often, all the time with writers is that they can write anything. And that might be true. You might actually be a writer that can write anything and that is good at writing both comedy and drama, females, males, kids, adults, teens, whatever. You very well might be the writer that can write anything. However, the writer that can write everything is the least memorable and also the least sellable writer in the business. When an executive has an open writing spot for, I don't know, let's just pick a show like Jane the Virgin, and you know, they're looking for a person that can write light family drama but strong female voices, preferably in the Latino community. They're not going to look for the writer that can write anything. They're going to look for the writer that can write that. And if you are that, then you'll be the first person they call, or you'll be amongst the people on the list of first people they call. The person that people call or the person that people reach out to are never the writers that can quote-unquote write anything. So I encourage you to figure out what your brand is as a writer and stick to that brand, so that also when you reach out to a manager has an idea on how to manage you. As a manager, I wouldn't know what to do. Well, I know what to do with the writer, but I would not be able to sell a writer and help a writer whose brand is I can write anything. That is not helpful to a manager, so therefore when you approach managers, know what your brand is before you do that and be very specific about it. And then to a manager, that is much more easy to work with, much more effective to work with than the writer that can write anything. So there's my little tidbit on the brand. Now, let's just say you are a writer that can write anything and you have lots of samples. You have 4 comedy samples and you have 4 drama samples. You love to write both and you can write both. You are just not sure which one to go to. So one little piece of advice I give to people who literally can't decide which they want to do because they love both and they feel that they can write both, I often encourage them then to if they're strictly just screenwriters, I encourage them to lean towards drama, and here's why. In the comedy world, if you're just a screenwriter, you're also up against stand-up comedians, you're up against sketch comedy writers, you're up against sitcom writers, you're up against improv actors, you're up against just Twitter writers, you're up against article writers. These are the type of people that get staffed onto comedy shows, not just screenwriters. In the world of drama, however, your only competition are screenwriters. So there's no such thing as the improv drama actor. There's no such thing as the stand-up dramedian that you're competing against. There's very few Twitter writers, or there's very few article writers that get considered for drama projects. It's often just screenwriters, and I use the word often, but most of the people you're competing are screenwriters. So your competition is a little less, but also in the grand scheme of television, there are actually more dramas than comedy out there. So if you can't decide between the two, just maybe a bit of advice is just to look at drama as a way to do that. Okay. So yeah, and I left a little note here. Give a manager a clear idea on how to rep you, and that has to do with knowing what your brand is. So there's that little tidbit. And so let's just say a manager now has expressed interest with you, or in you, and expressed interest in repping you, and what do you do from there? So I often compare finding a manager to dating. So because at the end of the day, this is a long-term relationship, and you have to get along both personally and professionally. Obviously, the query letter or whatever you did got their attention. Started off with a phone call. So have a phone call, have a conversation with them, and see how you connect with them over the phone. See if they understand who you are as a writer. See if they get your taste as a writer, and see if you agree with their taste. And then if that all works out great, you want to try and have at least 2 meetings. I would include the signing meeting in that meeting as well. I think signing should be done in person. And when I mean signing, just basically an agreement that you guys work as managers. But have a couple meetings just so you get a sense of who these people are, because again, this is going to be a long-term relationship. Being with them, make sure you get what their personal taste is. Make sure you get that they get who you are as a writer. And again, aside from the professional relationship, this is also a big personal relationship, so make sure you feel comfortable with that as well. And this goes back to my my point about honesty and trust within the writer-manager relationship there. So during these phone calls and meetings, one thing you should definitely test for yourself are script notes. So obviously they'll have access to your script. They'll have access, and what you want to do is to test for yourself and for the manager whether or not this works. Not only do you want to know that the manager will give you good notes that you agree with and that you can work with and that you think are strong, but in vice versa, the manager also wants to see that you know how to take notes and you know how to apply notes and that you're good at development, because that's a big part of being a good writer. And if both parties agree on that, then that's you're off to the races, and that's a big start there. But if for whatever reason, you can't deliver the notes, then the manager might not be the right manager for you, or vice versa. If you don't like their notes, then they might not be the best manager for you. So make sure during those phone calls, during those meetings, somewhere in there, there's a discussion about notes, and you have the time, and you're giving them the time to have a second draft for them to read or take a look at, just to make sure that you can apply those notes. So make sure you include that. And another thing that you need to assess. There's no black or white way on how to do this, but the biggest sort of balance that you're trying to look for in representation is their access to industries versus their hunger to represent you. So here's what I'm talking about. Is as an emerging writer, you're trying to find your place on a roster. That's really what you're trying to do. Because let's be honest, a manager wants to do everything best for you, but the manager also has other clients that they have to look after as well. That's just the nature of the business. So your job is to find the best place on a roster. And again, there's no black and white way on how to figure this out, but this is what you're trying to assess. Is you want a place on the roster where the manager will definitely pay attention to you and work with you, but you also want to know that the manager has the ability to do things for you as well. So oftentimes, when you're finding, let's say you find a young emerging manager, you'll probably fit right well in his roster, but he or she might not have the access and the connections in the industry that you want. But vice versa, you'll come across a manager that has lots of connections, lots of ins and outs and relationships in the business, but he or she might have a massive roster, and you might fit at the very bottom. So this is something that you have to sort of suss out. So always ask your manager how many people they represent, just to get a sense of where you might fit on that roster, what type of shows that they're staffing on, what type of shows that they're trying to sell, and just see how you might fit on that roster, and see if they're able to, if they might be able to get you that access as well. So it's always the balance of access, and I put hunger here. In other words, hunger to help you, desire to help you. And that often plays a big part into whether or not they're the best manager for you. So if you can ask them how many people they rep and the type of shows that they're on, that'll help you understand where you fit on that roster. And last but not least, I want to talk about the tact and the etiquette when it comes to choosing a manager, because this is oftentimes something that I find writers often neglect and often disregard, is the type of tact that one should have when seeking out and talking to a manager and trying to find a manager. So first off, I say always have full disclosure in terms of what you're trying to do. If you're meeting other managers, tell the person that you're meeting, tell the manager that I'm meeting other managers, I've met here, and even tell them where you're interested in, because your job is to give them a reason, to give you a reason to go with them. And so give them that chance. Tell them the people that you're meeting with, tell them how often you've met with them, tell them when you've met with them, and tell them what your intentions are and what you're looking for in a manager. In other words, full disclosure. That helps you and the manager decide whether or not this will be a good relationship. And after that, after your first meeting or your second meeting, whatever that might be, if you're looking to make a decision, always give the manager a chance for the last word before you make the decision. That's just good etiquette, because if for example, if I've given you some notes and you're going to come back and see if you can address those notes, and you're literally trying to make a decision with the manager, give me or give the manager a chance for the last word before you make the actual decision. It's just good etiquette, because that's just how that manager would like to give before you make your decision. Is there's nothing worse than you meet with a prospective client and everything looks great, and you've had the meeting, and then as you are giving notes or in the process of a rewrite, you decide to go with one person. Just give the manager the last word before you make that decision, and that'll always make make for good relationships moving forward. And also, it might allow you to get some information that you might not have gotten earlier from the manager. So there's that part of it. And the last thing I have here is leaving a manager. And I always put this here just as a little tidbit. If you do have a manager, or you end up getting a manager, if you don't like what they're doing for you, if you don't feel it's working, again, give them a chance to right their wrong. Be open and communicative with them. But the last thing you want to do is just to drop them without giving them a chance to right their wrong. So I just want to leave that in there as well, because that's also a gripe that a lot of managers have. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I know I've been rambling on for a while here. So yeah, I'm going to open it up to questions if anyone has any.
All right, Conrad, thank you for that webinar. It was excellent. All of that information was very informative. And now we are ready to open up for Q&A. People go ahead and type in your questions. Some people have been giving their questions along the way, and so I'll start with those, and you can keep sending them in and get them in now if you want me to ask about it. All right, let's start with Rebecca, and she sent this one in before the webinar even started. So she really wanted to get this one out to you. Do you feel
Okay.
that ageism can be an obstacle in getting literary representation?
Sorry, what can be an obstacle?
Ageism, how old she is. She feels like that
Ageism?
might be working against her.
Uh, mm, my initial answer would be no, only because I think if there's a great sample, a manager will know what to do with a great sample, regardless of age. Um, however, that's my short answer. The long answer is one thing that we can't combat is the political climate of the business, and not so much age as much of a factor. Unfortunately, and I hate admitting this because I have nothing to do with it, but it's the way the political climate works. The way that the industry has decided to address the diversity issue, in my opinion, has created a bit of a race issue. Um, it's almost, you can call it reverse racism, whatever you want to call it, but I've had clients and potential clients get turned down because they are white. And so I would say, just to add on to the question, is unfortunately, because of the political climate of the way the industry works, being white and also being old and white does could play a factor in manager managing you, because it adds that extra obstacle for them to deal with. Unfortunately, I hate saying it. I wish I could do something about it, but that's just the way the industry works. So, if age is a factor, I would, if you're reaching out to managers, I would mention that and just let that be known, but also let the samples speak for themselves. And if the sample is great, the manager will know what to do with that sample, and go from there. And then also let it known too, if you're looking to get a manager, what could help is if you consider yourself older, and also if you feel like you're in that category of the non-diverse writer, make it known that staffing is not your number one be-all end-all goal. You just want to write great screenplays that could sell and that could attract attention. I know for me as a manager, if I read that, then I'd be like, okay, well, he or she has realistic expectations, and then that would entice me to want to engage with that writer, or writer more. So so yeah, unfortunately, that's the climate of the industry. I hate that it is, but regardless, I would encourage all writers to just put their focus in the sample, and if the sample is great, that the sample will do the work.
All right, thank you for that answer. All right, we're on to Kenny. He says, what if you're a comedy screenwriter who is also a sketch comedian improviser at UCB? How would he go about getting staffed on a comedy show?
Um, if you're a sketch comedy writer on UCB,
Yeah, he's a sketch comedian and improviser at the UCB in LA.
okay. Yeah, obviously that all works in your favor, and because being at UCB, you have that extra exposure. But I think it goes whether or not you're at UCB or not. The strategy is still the same. The approach is still the same. Write an amazing pilot, and when you reach out to people, when you're branding yourself as a person, use the fact that you're a UCB writer as your brand, and that'll help get some attention, because again, it's a very well-known place for comedy writers. But in terms of the approach is the same. Write a great pilot, write a great sample, and use your connections at UCB, use the UCB brand to do that. And you might not know this, but I know from working at several management companies, and I know working with agencies, they're coming to watch your shows. You might not know it, but they're sitting in the audience and they're looking for the next talent. And so if they want to find the next talent, they will find you. And if they're not finding you, then I would strongly think that there might be your material might not be as strong as you think it might be. So they're looking, and don't be surprised if you do something great, someone will reach out to you.
All right. Next up is Adam. He would like to know, where can writers obtain successful scripts to study?
It's a great question. If you're able to get access to the Writers Guild Library, that's great. The Los Angeles Public Library actually has a lot of scripts there as well. You'd be surprised how many scripts you can also find online that are available. But this goes back to also networking. If you're a good networker, really the only person you really need to find is an assistant at a production company, agency, network, studio. Those assistants have access to a lot of material, and if you kindly ask them to send some to you, they can. So I think, so to answer your question, check the library, check online, but most importantly, network with people that have that access, and it doesn't need to be high-profile people. Assistants probably have more access than most executives do. I know when I was an assistant, I had access to a lot, and I was able to get access to, and so if someone asked me for scripts, it wouldn't be a problem for me because I'd store them all in a folder, and I'd just send the folder. So if you want to find them, I'd say try and network and try and find ally yourself with a great assistant.
Awesome. All right. Next up, Ian. He would like to know, is being located outside of LA a problem in finding representation?
That's a great question. It depends if your intention is to move to LA. If your intention is not to move to LA, then that can be a problem because it's much harder for the person. If I don't know you from a hole in the wall, it's much harder for me to get you to meetings and plan your staffing opportunities with you not being here. It makes a world of difference for you being here. However, if your plan is to move here, then make sure you state that your plan is to move there. And as soon as any heat comes along with the submission of your scripts or your samples, make sure you make it well known and that you have full intention to make the move or to spend a long period of time here if you need to. Other than that, though, it could be a hindrance, especially for emerging writers looking to get out here.
Great. All right, Lisa has a question for screenwriters who would like to work in film. She says that she's not interested in being a staff writer. Is there a market for someone like her who only wants to work in film, and does it make it harder for her to secure a manager if she decides that this is her path?
That's a great question. So in the world of film, the mantra of sample, 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 or in this case, great, great, great feature script is even greater because you could be the best networker, you can be the best, person in a room, but at the end of the day, in the feature world, it's definitely the ability to write a great feature screenplay. And so it does, in terms of finding a manager, the mantra of having a strong script is the only factor. It doesn't matter how old you are, what race you are, what ethnicity, if you're diverse. When it comes to selling that feature, it just needs to be a great feature. So that could either hinder or not hinder you depending on what way you look at it. Because that being said, if it's a great feature, then you have to try and find a way to get that manager to read that feature. And that on itself can be, a challenge on its own. So the best advice I could give to someone who's just wanting to look into the feature world is to do the networking, do the hustling in order to get that, like I said in the webinar there, give that reason for a manager to get to reply to you. Find whatever that might be, whether it's the attention of a producer or an assistant or anything like that, and let the sample or let the feature film script speak for itself. And if you are sending it out to people, if people are reading it and it's not tracking and it's not getting as much traction as you think or as you would like, then it might be a sign that the screenplay still needs work and it needs to be elevated a little bit. But if the screenplay is good, I guarantee you it'll travel, it'll find its way to somebody. It happens all the time, and I see it all the time. And so I hope I answered that question well. I would really, it really comes down to how great that feature is, and less elements play into whether or not a manager wants to manage you there. The only element really is how great the feature is. So yeah, I hope I answered that question.
I think you did. And if Lisa wants to follow up to that, she can go ahead and write it in. But I think you pretty much covered what she was asking about P and Herb and writing
Okay.
back. All right, next question. How much time do managers spend actually looking at the query letters that come into their inbox?
Very little, and this goes to my point about brevity is key. Is we get inundated with tons of emails. You know, just even doing this webinar, I'm just looking over. I think I got 38 emails during that webinar. We get inundated with emails all the time, and so for me, you know, if I'm looking at a query letter and I know and I just see this long paragraph about, you know, whatever you want to talk about, I'm less inclined to look at it. Like really, and I know it sounds really cynical, but I just want to get to the point. Like, why should I read your email? Why should I want to reply? And so give me that reason and give it to me as brief as possible, and I will read the full query letter. But if I'm halfway through, if I'm, you know, partway through, and I know that I have a whole, you know, massive email to get through, I'm less likely to want to look at it. So to answer your question, I don't spend a lot of time reading query letters, and if I do, I want to know that I can answer the question whether or not I want to reply pretty quickly. So give me that reason to reply, and then and give it to me as quick as possible, and then you will likely get a reply.
Awesome, great. So people write down those tips. All right, JE, he says that he is one half of a writing team, and he has
Mm.
a concept for a season of a TV series that is already currently on the air.
Sorry,
How?
you cut out there for that last part. Can you repeat the last sentence?
Yes, he said he has a concept for a season of a TV series that is already on the air, and
Okay.
he would like to know how he would go about approaching the series with his concept.
So I just want to understand the question here. So if it's on the air already and he still wants to go out with the concept?
He wants to pitch them his idea for a season of the TV show.
Oh, got it. So not knowing what the TV show is, it might play a factor in how I answer this question. But in general, I would say that that would be a fool's errand, a futile task to try and approach a television show and say, "Here's my idea for season 3 or whatever." Um, uh, I just don't. That just wouldn't be an effective way if your goal is to get staff in the room, or if your goal is to get attention. You know, that would be, in my opinion, not an effective way to do that. Chances are they've already have it all mapped out, and the chances of your idea, no offense to whoever asked the question, but the chances of your idea being totally thought out and better than all the other ideas that every writer in that room presented, along with the showrunner, might not be very high. Now that being said, it depending on what type of show. If the show is already, you know, a big success and it's on its, subsequent seasons, then it's really hard to really break into those shows. However, if you find a show, and these are rare, but they do exist. If you find a show that does not have the best ratings or that does not have the best following, and it's in its nascent stage, in other words, it's like season 1 or even season 2, and doesn't have the biggest following, but you believe, or maybe you don't, but maybe you believe that it will get a following or that it will continue to stay on the air, those are the interesting shows to look out for. And I say this based on a story that I've heard from a writer named Moira Beckett, and she won the Emmy for her episode of Breaking Bad. Now, what happened with her is, and again, this is rare, but it can happen, and this is something you could look out for. when Breaking Bad first came out, there was like 300,000 viewers, if that. There was not a lot of people. But she saw the show and she liked it for obvious reasons. It's a pretty phenomenal show if you haven't seen it. But it didn't have the ratings that it wanted, didn't have the following, but she saw potential in the show. And so she studied the show and she spec'd an episode. And she cold called and reached out to one of the producers on the show and said, "Hey, I love your show. I know it's not, as big and following as you want, but I love it. And I'm a writer and I spec'd an episode." And the producer read it and it was great. Vince Gilligan read it, it was great, and it's through that Vince Gilligan said, "You can write them. You can definitely write in the voice and you can write in the characters' voices." And he staffed her on the show, and she ended up winning an Emmy for it. And now she's a big writer, and now she's a big showrunner. Anyways, that's a rare story, but that being said, that happened because she managed to find this gem of a show that had no following, that had low ratings, and it was in season one. And so if you can find that, and you're passionate about a show like that, then that's something to look out for. The only risk is that if you find one, those shows often get canceled, and so you might end up writing a spec of a show that no one will ever read and no one will ever care about because the show got canceled. So that's the other risky part of it. But to go with your initial question, I would say, you could try, but I don't think it would be very effective to go approach a show and say, "Here's what I think you should do for your next season." That's my opinion for that.
All right, up next, we have a question about when you were talking about a writer that can write anything. I believe that this goes back to that.
Yeah.
Ian would like to know, does your advice about comedy versus drama also apply to dark comedies?
Yeah, absolutely. Comedy is comedy. If you want to talk about genre, dark comedy fits in the comedy pile, and if you feel like that, if you're trying to compete in the comedy space, then you'll be competing against those people with your dark comedy spec, or with your dark comedy original. So yes, I would say dark comedy is included in that. But that isn't to say, and I'm not saying it happens all the time, but sometimes, comedy writers will get staffed on drama shows and drama writers will get staffed on comedy shows. That does happen. At the end of the day, you never know what showrunners are looking for, and good writing is good writing. So, but I would put dark comedy in that pile of other competition in the comedy world.
All right, next up, we have a question from Amy. Now, she would like to talk about what you were saying about choosing a brand. She says her brand is being a 1-hour sci-fi shows such as Agents of the Shield and Dark Matter. But
sorry, you cut out there. I got 1 hour sci-fi and I missed the third part.
If her brand is being a 1-hour sci-fi TV writer, shows, okay. Like Agents of Shield, Dark Matter, but she has a 1-hour sci-fi comedy script. Is it feasible to get that sold and have a manager help her to get that sold, or should she focus on selling her 1-hour sci-fi series?
Yeah, so when I mean your brand, there's a difference between selling a script and selling a writer, right? And so I would assume most TV writers want to be staffed on a show. And so when I said focus on your brand, make sure that you know what that brand is as a writer. But if you have a sci-fi comedy written already and it's great, and you want to take it out as just a script that you want to sell, then the brand of the writer isn't as important. It just comes down to the how great the script is. But if you want to try and get staffed on the show, if you want to get the attention of showrunners to bring them onto your show, then yes, you should have a brand that you're trying to go for. Make sure that your samples speak to that brand of writer. And so that's what I was implying when I was talking about focusing on your brand. But if you have a script that's written that deters from your brand and it's good and you just want to sell it, then by all means, take it out to market.
Great. All right, up next, we have a series of questions about getting the manager to actually read your script. Okay, so I'm just going to lump these all together. Would you actually attach a script to a query letter, and would you recommend sending that letter off to production companies as well and showrunners as well that work in your genre?
Yeah, totally. So query letters, if you want to send one out, I send it to everybody and anybody, production companies, showrunners, whatever. Hopefully you get a response, but maybe not. And it doesn't hurt to attach the script there, but make sure you're tactful in saying that you have your script attached because, at the end of the day, you want to show that you're not trying to be intrusive or invade their 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 world. Um, that being said, um, some writers, some people would advise against that because you're sending your script out to people. But I think in this town, there's so much out there, and um, um, uh, there's so much being sent and spread throughout there. As long as you've protected yourself and copywritten your script and registered with WJ, whatever it might be, it's okay to do that. For me, I would just say in the email, it's attached here if you're interested to take a look. And for me, it just eliminates an extra step. So that's what I would do. But I think just beware. Some people might advise against that, but that's what I would do.
All right, great. Okay, our final question is going to come from Michael. He
So
would like
sorry,
to
let me go back to that original question. I just had a second thought because if I'm a manager, right? Again, you're trying to make it as efficient for me as possible. Like say if I got one and I read your log line and I liked it, or I read whatever you're asking and I liked it, like for me to just double click on a script and just take a look at the first two pages, like you've just made it very easy for me to do that, as opposed to now I got to respond, send me another script, and you send it. You know what I mean? Like it just saves a few steps. So that's why I recommend doing it. Just again, getting into the psychology of the person you're sending to. If your log line kicks ass, like, and I just have to double click on something just to read it a little bit, then you've just made it easier for me. So that's why.
Great. Okay, thank you for following up on that one.
Mm.
Our last question is from Michael. He says, why might a producer at a management company not sign you, but ask you to bring them more ideas to potentially develop together?
That's a great question. So I'm not sure about the producer at a management company part of it, but I think just anybody, whether they're a producer or a manager, is that a couple reasons. One, your script might be, you know, a 7 out of 10, a 6 out of 10 script, and they just want to see if there's anything more there. If you have the ability to write the same consistency in your writing. Really, that's what they're looking for is consistency. Like for me, if I ask for a second sample, it means I liked what I read. Do you have anything else? Like, are you a one-hit wonder here? And that's my psychology when I asked a writer for more samples, is because I'm interested and I like what you have, or you send me a script and I like it. I like your writing, but I just didn't like the concept, or the concept I didn't think was sellable. Or if I'm a producer, I already have something that's on my slate. What else do you have because you're a good writer? So if they ask for a second sample, it's normally a good sign.
Great. All right, I just want to thank you for giving this webinar today. And I just want to give you right now just the last few seconds to, just give any final words that you have to these writers as they're going out there and trying to pursue getting representation in the management.
Um, no, I don't have anything more to add. I'll just emphasize, take the time to really get your sample, your original pilot, to as strong as it can possibly be, and then really also take the time to know what your brand is as a writer. And if you figure those two things out, I think you're well ahead of the game. So those are my last two bits to leave with, and I wish you guys all the best.